Hello, come on in. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to have you here with me this evening. I hope you are well. Come on in, come on in. Deep breaths. It has been a day, but I am here. Glad that I'm here. Glad that I'm able to share with you all on another Thursday. Welcome to The Best Investment. If you have not been with me before, this is your first time, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. If you're watching this on a replay, thank you so much for sticking with me and hearing me talk about some of my favorite topics. I'm so glad to have you here with me tonight. Come on in, come on in. I certainly won't be here long, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to always share with you all what's on my heart. Some of these topics are topics that I feel I've had firsthand experience with. I've had several people that share this information with me, and so I want to find some way to share it with you. So welcome again. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to The Best Investment. Like I said before, if this is your first time, thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching the replay. My name is Mona-Lee Belizaire. I am a personal growth strategist. I specifically help young adult women move from where they are to where they want to be. I'm also the creator of the I Am Choosing Me movement, and that's a movement just to encourage women to choose themselves continuously and consistently in every area of their lives. It's so important for us as women to choose ourselves and to know that we don't have to choose ourselves with choosing ourselves, it doesn't have to be at the expense of our families. It doesn't have to be at the expense of anything that we love. You are on watching The Best Investment. You might be watching on the replay. Welcome again. Thank you for joining me. I do The Best Investment every Thursday at 7 p.m. right here on Instagram Live. And so I thank you so much for joining me. Today, I'm going to be talking about boundaries. And I am not going to be talking about boundaries probably in the way that you all think about it. I'm going to mix some of it in there a little bit. But I'm going to be talking specifically about boundaries and how we don't use boundaries appropriately. So boundaries are obviously very necessary, right? When we think about boundaries, we think about it also in the way when we're driving on the road, right? We think about the guardrails. That's a type of boundary. So a boundary is a limit. So it gives us a guide. It allows us to figure out, okay, well, what is our limit? What are our limits, right? And so it's important for us when we are thinking about boundaries or even developing boundaries that we really understand what that means. And so I mentioned earlier, a boundary is a limit, but it's also, there's also a line. It also marks where something starts and where something ends. And so a lot of times when we think about boundaries, we probably think about, okay, well, boundaries in relationships as well, which is really, really good. But sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, if we're not careful, we do not use boundaries appropriately. So I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. And so one of the first ways that we actually do not use boundaries appropriately is we use boundaries as barriers. I'll say it again. We use boundaries as barriers. So boundaries and barriers are two different things, right? Boundaries, as I mentioned earlier, it gives us a guide. It shows us where there is a limit. Barriers, on the other hand, are actually obstacles. So when you think about a wall, when you think about something that is erected to prevent you from going somewhere, it prevents you from moving forward, it prevents you from progressing, that is a barrier. But a lot of times we mix up boundaries and barriers, and they're two totally different things. And sometimes what happens is that we use what can happen to us is that we understand, okay, well, we need to have boundaries, right? Like we may have been hurt in a relationship, or something may have happened to us. And so immediately we said, well, I'm not going to do this anymore, or I'm not going to engage in that anymore. I'm not going to let that person hurt me, or whatever it is that we say is not going to happen again. And then we turn those boundaries, or what should be a boundary, into a barrier. So we don't allow ourselves to feel love. We don't allow anybody to come into our space anymore. We have put up a barrier instead of developing boundaries with that person or with that situation or whatever it is. And so one of the things that we have to be careful of is that when we are developing boundaries, that we don't move over into barriers because we did not handle the hurt appropriately. We did not handle the pain appropriately. We did not heal from whatever it is that was hurting us. So I can even think about myself and just other situations that I know where, we've been hurt, we've gone through some things, and then sometimes we're like, well, since I don't want that again, I'm not going to give my all into a relationship, or I'm not going to give my all into something. And so we create barriers instead of boundaries. And so I just want to encourage you all that as we are thinking about what boundaries are, or we are working through boundaries, right? I think I'd mentioned earlier that boundaries are a guide for those of you who just came on, but boundaries are very important, right? They're important for us to have boundaries because it gives us a limit, but we want to be careful that we are using boundaries appropriately. Another way that we use boundaries inappropriately is our boundaries turn into fears. Our boundaries can really turn into fears, right? What we think are boundaries, they really turn into fears. And so sometimes, as I'd mentioned earlier, we experience hurt, we experience loss, we experience pain, and so fear starts to set in when we start to pull back, or when we start to say we are creating boundaries. I don't have to tell you. For those of you who are on, or even on the replay, I don't have to tell you that fear can be very crippling. Fear can stop you from doing what it is that you want to do. Fear can also stop you from what God has called you to do. Fear can also can prevent you from going into the God thing, and you stick with just the good thing. Someone had shared a post. I'm not remembering who the young lady's name is, so I can't even, but it's not my quote, but she was talking about how, we get into a space where we're so focused on the good thing that we neglect the God thing. And so having, not having boundaries appropriately, or misappropriating, for lack of a better term, our boundaries, can cause us to get into a space where we are fearful. And when we are fearful, we don't step out on faith. We don't go into areas we're supposed to go in. We stick to what we're supposed to. We stick to what we know because we are so fearful. And when we create these unhealthy, I'll call them like unhealthy boundaries that are either fear or as I'd mentioned earlier, barriers, we don't get to experience the fullness of God. We don't experience the fullness of all that He has for us. We don't really get to be prosperous because we're not stepping into anything. We're really being complacent. We're really being stagnant. We're really being set in our ways. Georgia, you said they are the end of others and the beginning of you and me. Yes, that is boundaries. Absolutely. It's where we end and where others begin. And so it's important for us to make sure that when we are thinking about boundaries, when we are thinking about boundaries, we're thinking about developing boundaries, that we really understand what that means. And so I'm going to give you 3 things tonight, 3 things for you all to consider when you are developing boundaries. And like I mentioned before, boundaries are good, right? It's good for us to have boundaries. It's good for us to have limits. It's good for us to be able to say, okay, well, I won't do this. I won't do that. I won't engage in it. But what does that really look like? So I don't want to share with you all what we need to work on, but I'm not sharing with you all how you need to work on these things or what you need to do. So the first thing to do is to ensure that you are going through a process of healing, or you have been healed. This is important because you cannot create healthy boundaries from a place of brokenness. It's very hard to do that. Because if you are broken, if you are still in despair, if you're still fighting through some things, it's going to be very hard for you to create any type of healthy boundary. Everything is going to be a barrier. Everything is probably going to be built in fear. It's just not going to be sitting in something healthy. And so it's important for us to do, to go through a healing process. And so that could look like making sure that you're getting therapy, making sure that you're checking in with yourselves, making sure that you have accountability partners, sure you're sharing with people, hey, I'm going through this rough process. I want to be healed. I want to be whole. And I'm sharing with you what I'm going through. And one of the most important things you can do is make sure that you're going through this healing process with God. He needs to be the first and the foremost in this process, because it helps you to really hone in on what's really going on, because sometimes we think we know all that's really going on, and that's not normally the case. When we tap into the Holy Spirit, he reveals some things to us that are hidden, or some things that we thought we had dealt with a long time ago and we did not. And so in life, especially when you're in relationships, any type of relationships, when you're in, whether in your marriage or a platonic relationship, you have friendships, sometimes struggles come up, and those reveal some things, those hidden places in your heart where you have not dealt with. So the first thing you need to do in order to create healthy boundaries, is to make sure that you've gone through a process of healing, or you are going through or you are healed, right? And I think that's always a journey. We're in different places in our lives, and we're always in a space where we have to have a posture where God can do work in us, because there's so much work. There's always work to be done, but there's always something that the Holy Spirit can work on in us. So after you have and for those of you who have just joined, welcome. We're talking about how you can create boundaries. I first started off by saying, by talking about two ways that we use boundaries inappropriately. So using boundaries as barriers, and using boundaries as boundaries we consider are really fears. We don't use them as fears, but we are fearful because we have created these boundaries that cause us to have fear. And so I just spoke about the first way that we can create healthy boundaries is to make sure that you go through a healing process, and that absolutely has to include God. The second thing that you should do is you have to identify where your limits are, and you have to state them. Some of us have no limits, to be honest. Some of us we out there just doing all types of things, being everywhere, right? And it could be we're doing good things as well, but we don't have any limits. So because we're always out there doing all types of things, right? We don't have any limits. We don't know where things stop. We don't know how to shut it off sometimes. And so it's important for us to determine, where are my limits? What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? What am I willing to tolerate? What am I not willing to tolerate? Because we all have limits, all of us. What we don't do is we don't exercise those limits, or we don't exercise those boundaries. So it's important for us to recognize what that is, and to be able to state it to other people as well. And once we're able to do that, one of my favorite things I think that's very important is that we have to learn how to say no. And I know some of you are like, okay, well, Mona, that's easy said than done. And I want to tell you, when it comes to saying no, there's really no way to practice it. You just have to say it. It's like, when Nike said, just do it. It really is like that. You have to just start saying no. There are things that we're all humans, but there are things that we all don't like. There are things that we don't appreciate. There are things that we don't like somebody doing, or there are things that we don't even want to do. Right? And sometimes we think, okay, well, I'm going to do this out of the goodness of my heart. And while that is helpful, sometimes depending on what it is, we're doing things in a place that's not genuine, and it ends up being more of a burden to us and to the other person that we're doing something for, I should say. And so it's very important for us to be able to say no. No is it's a 2-letter word, right? But it's one of the hardest things that we can do. But it's very important for us to make up our mind to say, yes, Jessica, and resentment sets in. Bitterness sets in, and then all of a sudden, you're just not even in a good place. And then now you got to start all over again with the process. So it's important for us to be able to say, you know what, I'm creating boundaries. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is that I'm learning to say no, and that I'm actively saying no. Because if we don't have any limits, then we find ourselves tired. We find ourselves worn out. We find ourselves not enjoying even the things that God has called us to do, because we've been busy doing the other stuff that we had no business doing, even when they are good things. So it's important for us to practice these three things. I'm going to repeat them again. So we have to ensure that we are coming from a place of healing, right? That we've gone through some type of healing process, that we include God in that. We actively state to accountability partners or friends that we trust what's going on in our lives, right? Share with them. Let them know, hey, I'm trying to overcome this thing. I've been hurt. I'm going through this thing and I need your support. And also get therapy. I am a big proponent of prayer, and I'm also a big proponent of therapy as well. The second thing, just to repeat, that we need to do in terms of creating boundaries is that we have to determine where our limits are. What are your limits? Ask yourself that question. Do I have any limits? What are my limits? What am I willing to tolerate? What am I really willing to deal with? What am I willing to take on? Right? What am I willing to say yes to? And then also, finally, what are you willing to say no to? How do you say no as a person? What does that look like for you? And for some people, you may have to practice saying no. In front of the mirror several times before you get an opportunity to even practice it. But it's something that you have to do, and you just have to do it. There's really no way around it. But it helps us to have these great boundaries. It helps us to be able to say, I'm not going to tolerate certain things. It helps us to be able to say, I'm not going to allow people to do certain things to me as well, or I'm not going to participate in something. So I hope that this was a blessing to you all. If you came on late, you can catch me on the replay. You can just get a review of what I said. And I would love to hear from you all. How do you create healthy boundaries for yourself? What do you do to make sure that you have good boundaries with other people? It's very important, because people will try you. People will take advantage of you. They are people. We love them. Some of them do want the best for us. Some don't want the best for us. And so that's why we have to identify where our limits are, what we're willing to do, what we're not willing to do, what we're willing to join in, what we're willing to not join in, what we're willing to say. And so I encourage you all. Hey, Rashida, thanks for joining. I encourage you all, if you joined late, join me on the replay. This was definitely a quick live tonight. But I just wanted to come on and cover with you all specifically how we don't use boundaries appropriately, right? And so I talked earlier about boundaries as barriers. So we use boundaries as barriers, and then some of our boundaries are rooted in fear. And so, as I mentioned, catch me on the replay. If there's anything that I shared tonight, anything that I said that resonates with you, anything that I said that you feel like, man, this was really good, share it with somebody. Don't keep it to yourself. I want everybody to know what are some of the good things that resonate with me, and also you need to be able to share it with other people as well. If you have not checked me out on my website, please do. Mona-Lee Belizaire.com. I would love to work with you. Information on my direction program is on there. I also have a freebie that I developed, which I absolutely love. It walks you through how to create a vision statement for your life. It really goes through some really deep questions. And so if you go on my website, it's the first, you see it pop up, and you can download it, and it will share, and you can, walk through it and specifically share. You can share it. Well, I'd love for you to share it with me, because I'd love to hear your vision statement, but it's also something that you can share with others as well. I think having a vision statement for your life is very important. It's very pivotal in every season of your life, that you have something that is guiding you, that is guiding your professional and your personal decisions. So I welcome you to go on my website and check it out. Also, don't forget to come back here next week again at 7 p.m. I'm here every Thursday for the best investment. And next week, I'm so excited to talk about my topic. The topic is voice. And I'm going to talk about 3 ways that we can use our voice. God gave us a voice. I'm sure most of you all know about the creation story in the Bible. God spoke creation. And so we have a voice that God has given us to use. And so I want to share with you 3 ways that we are supposed to use our voice. Rashida said, I definitely struggle at times. We'll definitely struggle. We'll definitely catch the replay. Yes, please catch the replay. I would love for you to share with me, Rashida, when you catch the replay, what are some nuggets that resonated with you. And so till next time, everybody, thank you all so much for joining me. I truly appreciate your support for coming on. Hey, Deshauna, I'm just getting ready to get off, but catch the replay, girl. It's real good. And thank you all again so much for joining me. And always remember that you are the best investment. Take care. Bye.